A wealthy man shamed an elderly woman at the checkout who couldn't pay for her groceries, but when he saw who arrived to pick her up, what won't you do for the sake of work? Right? Harry, a young couturier, lived with that very thought. He was one of the most promising designers of his generation. His collections had already caught the attention of several critics, and his pieces even appeared in local publications, but true success was still ahead. An international fashion show, that was his chance to take things to the next level, to show the world his talent and establish himself in the upper echelons of the fashion industry. It seemed like he was just a few steps away from that moment, but those steps turned out to be the hardest. In order to get into that show, Harry needed the support of one influential woman, the editor-in-chief of a world-renowned fashion magazine. Her name inspired awe in fashion circles, and many designers dreamed of her approval. Her opinion could literally make or break the career of any couturier. She had a keen eye for detail, impeccable taste, and an uncompromising character. She had made it clear many times that she valued only genuine innovation and individuality. Copies, imitations, and weak work were immediately rejected, regardless of the author's reputation or ambitions. Harry was determined. He knew his work could impress her, but talent alone wasn't enough. He needed to find a way to reach her, to showcase himself, his work, and most importantly, to make her believe in him. The situation seemed typical of many Hollywood films. A young, talented designer meets his future mentor, and together they conquer the fashion world. But real life was much more complicated. This woman, editor-in-chief Sophia Langevin, remained something of a mirage for Harry. It seemed impossible to catch her interest, no matter how hard he tried. He sent her invitations to his shows, catalogs of new collections, even personally delivered an exclusive piece from his latest collection to her office, but all efforts were met with silence. It was as if she was deaf and blind to all his attempts. Late one night, Harry sat in his studio, sorting through sketches for a new collection. The room was dimly lit, fabric scraps were scattered across the floor, and a cup of cold coffee sat on the table in front of him. He ran his hand through his hair and clenched his fist. "Why doesn't she notice me?" he said aloud, as if speaking to himself. On his laptop screen, another fashion show was playing, featuring colleagues who were less well known, but who, by some miracle, had caught Sophia's attention. What am I doing wrong? This question constantly ran through his mind. Harry remembered his latest attempt. He had decided to collaborate with a young designer whom Sophia had once mentioned in an interview. The collection was bold, innovative, with elements of avant-garde that were supposed to grab her attention. But again, silence. No reaction. One day, while attending yet another local show, Harry couldn't help but think, what else can I do? He had even changed his style, adding classic elements to his collections, hoping this move would attract her attention. But all efforts were in vain. Harry discussed this with the same designer at a small social gathering. "I've tried everything," he sighed, taking a sip of wine. "Collaborations, changes in style, participation in shows. But this woman, she doesn't see me." "Sophia," his colleague said in surprise. "You know it's not easy to get her attention. She loves to turn her nose up until she sees something that literally flips her perception of fashion upside down. That's what worries me." Harry tightened his grip on his glass. "I've tried several times to show her something new, experimented. But how much longer?" "Maybe it's not about you," his colleague said thoughtfully. "Let's just say, her tastes change. It feels like she doesn't even know what she likes herself. But one thing is certain, when she's in the mood, everyone knows it." These words only added to Harry's tension. He needed Sophia to finally notice him. That magazine was a symbol of success, and her approval would mean that his work was ready for the global audience. He stood up, thanked his colleague for the conversation, and stepped outside to get some air. The cold wind made him breathe deeper. All or nothing, he whispered to himself, deciding that he wouldn't give up until he got her attention. Harry knew he had to come up with something truly special, something that would make Sophia shed her blindness and take a real look at his work. In the midst of his chase for recognition, constant work on his collections, and efforts to win Sophia Langevin's favor, Harry still had other responsibilities and concerns: his family. His wife, Marina, had tried to talk to him many times about how deeply he was getting lost in his work, but it seemed pointless. When they had first gotten married, she liked the idea of creating their own brand. She enthusiastically supported him, even helped with organizing things in the beginning, inspired by how Harry was building his career from scratch. It so happened that she became the best model in his team. Not because she was his wife, she just had a natural grace. But with each passing year, it became harder. Harry was home less and less. Even when he was there physically, his mind was always far away, somewhere in his studio, working on new designs, or at a show, analyzing how critics and the public perceived his work. All of this gradually distanced him from his family, and Marina began to point it out more and more. One evening, when Harry finally came home after another long work session, Marina couldn't hold back and tried to start a conversation. "You're late again," she said quietly, barely looking at him. Harry wearily sat down on the couch, rubbing his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry, but there's so much work in the studio. I'm almost done with the new collection, and soon." "Harry," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "When was the last time you were with us? I'm not talking about being present. I mean with us." "Really with us?" He sighed and hesitated. It was hard for him to answer that question. He knew he had grown distant from her, but there were always so many tasks in his mind, so many ideas that wouldn't let him rest. "You know how important this is to me, Marina," he finally said. "I'm so close to taking our brand to the next level. If I stop now..." "What about us?" Her voice became sharper. "You're always far away, with your shows, sketches, magazines. We're living like strangers." Harry turned away. His thoughts drifted back to his work again, and it frustrated him. He didn't want to stop, didn't want to put his dreams on hold when he was so close. But Marina continued. "And it hurts me so much in those moments that are supposed to be ours. When I try to talk to you, when we're alone, I feel like I'm just background noise to you, something secondary. All you have in your head is your work." He remained silent, not knowing what to say. She was right, but admitting it out loud was hard. "I'm trying," he began, but she interrupted him again. "You're not trying. You're just running off to your damn workshop because you're too scared to face reality." Tears glistened in her eyes, and she quickly turned away so Harry wouldn't see. It pained him to see her like that, but deep inside, he couldn't help but think that if he gave up now, his dream would crumble. Marina sighed, stood up, and went to the bedroom, leaving him sitting alone on the couch. Harry, left alone, sat for a long time, reflecting on her words. It was hard for him to admit that his pursuit of success was destroying his relationship with his wife, yet at the same time, his dreams and goals lived inside him, relentlessly pushing him forward. Over time, these conversations became less frequent. Marina grew more distant. She stopped asking when he'd come home, stopped expecting his attention. Harry noticed this, but he felt powerless to change it. He believed that success in fashion was the only path to happiness, and he was willing to stake everything on it. But every time he came home after long hours of work, the house no longer felt like the cozy place it once had. Even when they were alone, there seemed to be an invisible wall between them. Marina tried to smile, tried to be gentle, but in her eyes, Harry sensed detachment. She often thought back to the days when she had been his muse. When their life seemed like a fairy tale, full of creativity, inspiration, and love. Harry had sewn his first dresses and blouses just for her. Those clothes weren't just garments, they were an extension of their feelings for each other. Each dress came alive on her, took on new colors, and breathed on her body. She remembered how he looked at her with such admiration when she proudly tried on his creations. His eyes shone with such delight that she believed she would always be the center of his universe. "I'm sewing this just for you," he had once whispered, taking measurements for a new dress. "It won't shine like this on any other woman. It's your dress, Mari. She smiled back then, feeling like his muse, his inspiration, the source of all his ideas. Every new project started with her, how she wore his clothes, how she looked in them, how they highlighted her unique beauty. But now, it all seemed like a sad dust of the past. Time had stolen those moments from her, and all that remained was emptiness and a sense of loss. The pursuit of fame and success had taken not only the role of muse from her, but also Harry himself. His eyes no longer sparkled with excitement when he looked at her. All that was left was tiredness in his gaze. Their teenage son and daughter didn't understand the depth of the tragedy. Amber and Hugo thought their father was just too busy. For them, it was perfectly normal that he was constantly occupied and rarely home. They enjoyed boasting to their peers that their father was a famous couturier whose collection sold out in a day. They were proud, telling stories at school about how their dad was designing yet another fashion line. It was easy for them to ignore his absence in their lives because, to them, it meant only one thing: their family was successful, famous, and well off. "Dad's off to another show," Amber would say with a smile to her friend when asked why he didn't attend the school event. "Yeah, he's in Paris right now, launching a new collection," Hugo would add, not without pride, telling how busy their father was. They didn't see what Marina saw. They didn't understand how his absence was eating her up inside. All she could do was watch as the children rejoiced in his achievements, but failed to realize what kind of childhood he was depriving them of by being so absent. She was alone in her misery, even though she was surrounded by wealth and luxury. Their house was enormous, stylish, filled with the latest designer trends. The wardrobe was stocked with luxury brand items, and the garage housed an entire fleet of cars. Her life seemed perfect from the outside, but on the inside, it felt like a padded cell. Harry and Marina barely talked anymore. Even when he was home, their conversations were reduced to formalities. "How was your day? What's the plan for the next week?" One day, when Harry came home later than usual, Marina tried to start a conversation. "Do you remember how happy we were when you made your first dresses for me?" she asked quietly, hoping to awaken some memory of those days. Harry looked at her with tired eyes. "That was a long time ago, Marina," he replied, showing little interest in the conversation. "Now there's just too much work. Everything's changed." "So, you're okay with this?" Her voice held more pain than she expected. "You're fine with coming home, throwing out a hi, honey, and going straight to bed? I guess this is how real family life starts. The husband's the breadwinner, and the wife's just some domestic hen. Why spend time with her? She's not going anywhere, right?" Harry stayed silent. He knew she was right, but what could he do? He believed that all his efforts should be directed at his career, that success at work would bring happiness to everyone. But in this pursuit of fame, he had lost the most important thing, her. Harry understood everything. He saw how Marina was giving up, felt her coldness and exhaustion from their relationship, which was more and more like a hollow formality. He knew she was suffering, that her loneliness in their big house was tearing her apart inside. It pained him to realize this, but he believed it was temporary. In his mind, the plan was clear: just a little more effort, one more collection, one more step, and everything would change. He thought that if he could just get that coveted article in a major fashion magazine, their life would get back on track. Harry often repeated to himself, just one article. Just one paragraph. It became his mantra. He believed that if Sophia Langevin, the editor-in-chief of that very magazine, noticed his work and mentioned him even in a small column, everything would fall into place. It would open doors to the world of high fashion, bring stability and financial success, which, he hoped, would allow him to return to his family. One evening, when Harry was once again working late in the workshop, Marina called him. "You'll be coming home late again." Her voice was quiet, tired. Harry hesitated for a second, not knowing how to respond. He was indeed planning to work late into the night, finishing his latest project. "I'm sorry, love," he sighed. "Just a little longer, one more dress, and I'll be home. I promise, everything will change. I just need to finish this." Marina was silent for a while, then, with noticeable bitterness in her voice, she asked, "Do you really think one more dress will change anything?" Her question pierced Harry. Thousands of thoughts raced through his mind, how he feared he wouldn't make it in time, that all his efforts would be in vain. But the thought that tormented him most was, what if Marina doesn't wait for me? What if she leaves before I succeed? He feared that without that long-awaited article, he would lose his family. "It's not just a dress," Harry finally replied. "It's the last push. If Sophia doesn't notice me, I'm afraid all the work will have been for nothing." Marina sighed. Her voice was soft, and behind all that tenderness was an unmistakable sense of resignation. "I don't mind your work, Harry," she said, "but I mind that you've become a prisoner to it. You're chasing this dream like it's a ghost, and I keep waiting for you to come back. But it feels like you've already left and aren't looking for a way home." "I'll come back," Harry said firmly. "You'll see. As soon as this is over, we'll be together again. I just have to do this, don't you see?" Marina didn't respond. She understood that he was anxious too. He was afraid that everything they had been through together would crumble if he didn't achieve his goal. But she feared something else, that even if he succeeded, she would lose him forever. When Harry hung up the phone, he remained seated in silence. Her words still echoed in his mind. He knew that every day he dedicated to his work was tearing the bond between them further apart. But the fear of missing his last chance at success was stronger. He felt as though his life would be incomplete without breaking into the international market. He couldn't stop now. He couldn't afford to lose when he was so close. He thought about how one day they would both be able to share in the joy of his victory. Marina would be proud of him again, just like before. Their relationship would be revived, and everything would get better. But deep down, Harry knew this was just an illusion. It wasn't just his wife that worried the couturier. His father, old and stubborn in his views, categorically refused to accept his son's choice. To him, fashion design was a woman's domain, unfit for a man. He would often repeat the same thing: a real man should be doing something serious, something worthy. These words echoed in Harry's head like a dull bell almost every time he touched fabric or sat at his sewing machine. The old man was convinced his son was wasting his life, spending it on useless rags. He couldn't understand how Harry, who once worked in the military police, had chosen such a feminine path. To his father, this choice was a true betrayal of manhood. Harry remembered the early years when he literally had to hide from his father. He would sew his first garments in the basement of their old house, far from his father's judgmental eyes. Sometimes, he would sneak downstairs at night to sew a dress that had been on his mind for days, only to hide it quickly if he heard his father's footsteps. Ben saw him as the pride of the family, the son who served the country and was a role model. If only he knew that Harry had never dreamed of military service but of creating. When Harry opened his first workshop, a real scandal erupted. Ben, who had always been proud that his son was a real man and served in the military police, couldn't believe his eyes or ears. To him, it was a blow to all his principles, ideals, and beliefs about a man's duty. "Is this a joke?" His father stormed into Harry's workshop that evening, finding him surrounded by fabrics, threads, and mannequins. "Are you serious? You had a real job, you were a man, and now you're doing this? Sewing? Like a woman." Harry stood in the middle of the room, silently listening to his father's shouts. This was the moment he had feared since he began his journey. He knew it would happen one day, but had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. "Dad, it's not just sewing," Harry replied calmly, trying to contain his frustration. "It's my passion. I create clothes, I express myself through design." "Express yourself?" his father growled. "Is this how you think a man expresses himself? Don't you see what you're doing? You're a man, Harry. You should be doing a man's work, not playing dressmaker." Harry clenched his fists. He had mentally prepared himself for his father's lack of understanding, but that didn't make it any easier. "Dad," he continued, keeping his voice steady. This isn't a game. This is my job. I'm building my brand. I want to break into the international market. You may not support me, but this is my choice. And Marina stands by me, and that's enough. His father waved him off, not wanting to listen. What international market? Do you even hear yourself? You're bringing shame to me, to the family. I used to proudly say my son was an officer, serving his country. And now what? You sew dresses for women? Your grandfathers must be turning in their graves. Ben, like a wounded animal, paced around the room. And that Marina of yours. Foolish girl, I knew she'd mess with your head. Marina. Shut up, boy. Harry couldn't find the words. He looked at his father, whose eyes were blazing with anger, and realized that no matter how much he tried to justify himself, nothing would change. The scandal dragged on. During those days, Harry even considered giving up. It was that hard to withstand his father's pressure. But he didn't give in. He continued to work, develop his brand, and look for ways to expand beyond the local market. Over time, his father calmed down a little. Not because he accepted his son's choice, but because he resigned himself to the fact that it couldn't be changed. A tense silence settled over the family. They no longer discussed Harry's work, but that silence was louder than any scream. Everything changed, however, when his father found out that Harry was trying to get into a famous fashion magazine. He learned that his son hadn't given up on his foolish dream and was still fighting for recognition. You still haven't come to your senses? His father asked one day at a family dinner, throwing his fork onto the table. You're still trying to break into a world where you don't belong? Harry sighed heavily, trying to remain calm. Marina, sensing the end of the piece, excused herself from the table, pretending she needed to take a call. The couturier glanced after his wife with slight envy. Lucky. She could avoid the conversation. Yes, he replied. I'm working on a collection for a private show, and the magazine's editor will be there. It's going to be a huge step for me and my brand. His father frowned, his face paling with anger. Harry, he began quietly but threateningly. This is the last thing I expected from my son. Don't you get it? Even in fashion magazines, they know that men don't belong in fashion. It's a woman's job, and you're stealing it from those who rightfully own it. Harry clenched his fists again, but didn't argue. The same old tune, he said firmly. I'm a designer, and my job is to create beauty. This isn't about gender, it's about art. But his father just waved him off. Art, he sneered. This isn't art. It's toys, whims for women. You'll never understand what it means to be a real man if you don't pull your head out from under a skirt. Which, by the way, you're tightening around your own neck. Harry wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. He feared one thing, that his father would never see his success. That everything he had built over the years would remain, in the old man's eyes, a pointless endeavor, a waste of time. But then came the day of that very show. Harry sat behind the wheel, nervously gripping it and glancing at the clock. Time was slipping away, and he was stuck in traffic that seemed endless. The cars were at a standstill, no one was moving, and the honking merged into an irritating chaos. His phone kept buzzing with notifications and calls. Colleagues, assistants, and organizers of the private show were all waiting for him to arrive. On the passenger seat sat Marina, gazing idly out the window. This time, she was supposed to be his main model. He had designed a special outfit for her that would be the highlight of the collection. But the real problem at that moment wasn't just the traffic or the stress before the show. Ben was sitting in the back seat of the car, dramatically sighing and groaning. The old man, eternally dissatisfied with his son, was particularly irritable today. Harry had to bring him along because his father insisted on being taken to the hospital, and unfortunately, the hospital was right on the way to the show. We're already late, Harry, Marina said quietly, glancing at her phone. If we don't move now, we won't have time to prepare for the show. The organizers have called 3 times already. I know, Harry muttered through gritted teeth. I'm doing everything I can. Harry's phone rang again, and his assistant's name flashed on the screen. He answered, trying to stay calm despite the growing tension. Harry, we can't wait any longer. Her voice was filled with worry. The sponsors are getting nervous. The show starts in half an hour, and we still need to get Marina ready. Where are you? I'm on my way, Harry replied tightly, trying not to show how irritated he was. The road's blocked, but I'll be there as soon as I can. As soon as he ended the call, a sarcastic voice from the back seat broke the silence. Another woman calling? The old man smirked, not hiding his irony. They're probably all waiting for you there. What, another assistant? Aren't you tired of all the attention yet? Careful, or Marina might get jealous, you never know. Better watch out, son, you might be playing with fire. Marina, sitting next to him, tensed up. The greasy hints about Harry's colleagues from his father always infuriated her. She had never been jealous of her husband, knowing how dedicated he was to his work, but when her father-in-law kept making his lewd jokes, it made her uneasy. Her thoughts, though unfounded, crept into her mind. Harry tried to pretend he didn't notice the joke, but inside, he was boiling. He always tried to stay calm to avoid pointless conflicts with his father. But this time, Marina couldn't hold back. Can you stop already? She snapped, her voice tight with frustration. We all know Harry works a lot, and he's a professional. For the record, I'm his wife, not some assistant. The old man looked at her through the rearview mirror, his face stiffening, but he wasn't about to give up easily. Oh, come on, Marina, he said with feigned innocence. I'm just joking. You know how these young assistants can be. Harry probably doesn't even have to choose, they're all after him. So, don't relax, who knows how those calls end. That's too much. Marina flared up, her eyes blazing with anger. I'm surprised you don't make yourself sick with this nonsense. Maybe you should think about how you sound to others? And you're going to tell me what's nonsense and what's not. The old man snorted. I'm just saying it how it is. Young and pretty assistants, working with him all day. You sit at home, but they're right there. Harry, sensing that things were getting out of hand, went quiet and closed his eyes. But the woman didn't back down. Ben, enough, she said sharply. This is our work. Our colleagues are the ones helping Harry create the collections. Sorry if old-timers like you can't produce masterpieces. The old man puffed out his cheeks and leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. Well. Just trying to warn you. You never know when these colleagues will cause trouble, he muttered, but it seemed like he decided to temporarily back down. Marina fell silent, trying to calm herself, but it was clear that she was still digging her nails into her palm. Harry felt a tightness in his chest. He hated when his family fought. Outside the car, the situation wasn't much better. The traffic was gridlocked, and drivers were venting their frustration, honking furiously and shouting insults at each other. Inside the car, a family drama was brewing. Harry's phone was constantly ringing with calls from assistants and organizers, their voices blending into a panicked cacophony. Harry, where are you? The sponsors are waiting. We can't start without you. Harry gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The tension inside the car was growing unbearable. His father continued with his insinuations and complaints. Oh, these women. As if they're all waiting just for you. Be careful, son, wives don't always take kindly to these kinds of jokes. Marina's not one to put up with that. Marina stared out the window, but her silence spoke volumes. She was holding back, but inside, she was on the edge. Harry could see her clenching her lips, her hand trembling as she tucked her hair behind her ear. Ben, could you just shut up for once? She couldn't hold it in any longer. All these idiotic hints are only adding more stress. The old man snickered, but he seemed to deliberately add fuel to the fire. Stress? Oh, really? If Harry were doing real man's work instead of these women's clothes, there wouldn't be any stress. Harry closed his eyes, exhaled, but the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control didn't leave him. The phone rang again, the tense silence from his wife, his father's mockery, it was all building up like water in an overfilled vessel. One more second, and he would explode. When the phone rang yet again, and his colleagues started shouting about more problems with the show, Harry couldn't take it anymore. "That's enough," he shouted and slammed his palm against the steering wheel with all his might. The sound was deafening, and the car's horn blared so loudly that even the drivers outside stopped for a moment, looking around at their car. A dead silence filled the car. Marina and Ben froze, shocked by such an outburst. Even the phone went silent, and an awkward pause hung over the line. Harry was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Enough," he shouted, unable to hold back his emotions any longer. "I can't take this anymore. You, Dad, with your constant criticism, with your real man's work. Stop belittling me for choosing my own path. Do you think it's easy for me? Do you think I enjoy hearing you call months and years of my hard work women's rags? And what did Marina ever do to you? We even work together. She's my best model, the star of the brand, my wife. What cheating and assistance are you talking about?" He turned to his wife, his eyes filled with pain and exhaustion. "Marina, you too," he said, his voice trembling. "You think you're not jealous, but every time Dad jokes about my colleagues, I see you tense up. I don't want to hear this anymore. I'm trying to build a career, I'm trying to succeed, but all I feel is constant pressure from every side. I'm not running away from you or the kids. I just want to finish what I started." Marina couldn't respond. Her face had gone pale, and she looked stunned. His father, on the other hand, frowned, his brows furrowing, but he said nothing. The situation had reached its boiling point. "And my colleagues?" Harry continued, raising his voice, though no one was arguing with him. "Why can't they handle things without me? Why, every time something goes wrong, do I have to fix their problems? Is it really so hard to be independent for once? I can't be everywhere at once." He hit the steering wheel again, though not as hard this time, more out of frustration. The oppressive silence returned to the car. No one dared to speak. Marina didn't know how to react, and Ben sat quietly, though his face showed typical parental disappointment. The phone still hung unanswered, and Harry irritably tossed it into the open glove compartment. The silence in the car was almost unbearable. Harry quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and, without saying a word, jumped out of the car, slamming the door as hard as he could. He didn't even know where he was going. He just wanted to get away from it all, the yelling colleagues, the nagging father, and the incessant complaints from his wife. The traffic jam seemed to be stuck for good, with no cars moving, giving him the chance to leave his car unattended, if only for a moment. After walking a few steps along the road, he noticed a small grocery store on the corner. Why not, he thought. A cold drink would be just what he needed. He quickly crossed the street and pushed open the glass doors of the store. Inside, there was a calm, almost soothing atmosphere. Gentle music played softly from the speakers, like a lullaby, as if meant to slow down the flow of time. People were lazily wandering between the aisles, choosing something for dinner or just browsing the shelves. No one was in a rush, and no one raised their voice. God, what peace! Harry muttered to himself, trying to calm down. He walked past the drink aisle and picked up a bottle of cold cola. He sighed, staring at the ceiling of the store, and closed his eyes for a moment. He tried to focus on the simple melody, attempting to bring some order to his chaotic thoughts. But the tension inside him refused to go away. He still felt the weight of responsibility, fear, and growing anxiety for his career, his family, and his life. Remembering the traffic and his unfinished business, Harry glanced at his watch. Any more delays, and he would definitely be late for the presentation. Everything at the checkout was going smoothly until it was the turn of an elderly woman. At first glance, she seemed well-groomed and neat, a tidy hat, old-fashioned but clean clothes, a decent purse, and an unusually bright manicure. But even at her age, no one is immune to forgetfulness. "Oh, where have I put everything?" she muttered as she slowly rummaged through her pockets, opened her bag, but couldn't find her card or wallet. Her purchase was simple, a set of fruits, an odd choice for a midday purchase, but that was her business. Harry stood behind her, still wound up like a tight spring, unable to relax for even a minute. The elderly woman, with her slow fumbling in her bag, seemed like just another annoyance to him. She emptied her bag again, sorting through her belongings, but to no avail. The entire line began to get restless, but no one said anything except Harry. He couldn't hold back any longer and, without hesitation, addressed the old woman. "Look, if you can't pay, don't hold up the line," he snapped in a harsh tone. "If old age is that much of a burden, you should check your pockets 100 times before getting in line." The elderly woman lifted her gaze to him, her eyes showing no surprise, just a faint disdain, as if she'd heard such remarks 100 times before and had stopped caring. Without saying a word, she pulled out her phone, quickly opened an app, and without acknowledging the rude man, paid for her purchase through her mobile app, calmly, without any fuss. Harry frowned. Something suddenly felt off. The expensive phone didn't seem to fit the image of an ordinary old woman who was frantically searching through her bag. He had expected to see an old flip phone, not the latest smartphone with a glossy screen. She gathered her fruit and calmly left, leaving Harry and the entire queue bewildered. When it was finally his turn, the cashier quickly rang up the bottle of cola. He paid for his drink, grabbed the bottle, and left the store, unable to stop thinking about the strange old woman. As he walked down the street, taking sips from his bottle, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual had just happened. "That eccentric old woman," he muttered to himself. Harry headed back toward the parking lot, still pondering the encounter. His irritation was slowly fading, but something about her wouldn't leave his mind. And then, in the parking lot, an unusual scene unfolded. The old woman, who had just been at the checkout, pulled off the ridiculous hat she had been wearing. From underneath it, beautiful, shiny, well-groomed hair emerged, cut neatly to shoulder length. That hair didn't belong to a woman of her age, at least not the one she appeared to be in the store. At that moment, a luxury car pulled up into the parking lot. A black, shiny, impeccably clean sedan, clearly an expensive brand. A serious middle-aged man, dressed in a formal suit, quickly got out of the car. He looked like a typical bodyguard or assistant, fit, composed, with quick, precise movements. Without wasting a second, he ran over to the woman and politely caught her cardigan, which had almost slipped off her shoulders. Harry froze, standing just a few steps away. He was captivated by this bizarre scene. Underneath the worn cardigan the woman had been wearing in the store, now peeked a stylish designer blouse and a perfectly tailored vest. It was an elegant outfit, put together for someone with a keen sense of fashion. Harry stepped closer to overhear what was happening. The conversation between the woman and her companion confirmed his worst and most surprising suspicions. "Madam, everything is ready," the man quickly said, holding the cardigan and offering his hand to her. "I delivered the documents to headquarters and picked up the photographs from the studio. I must have arrived just in time." "As always, Ronald," the woman replied, her voice cold and confident, with no hint of the helplessness she had shown in the store. "Perhaps I should visit small shops more often. You never know when you'll get a chance to hide from all the noise." Harry felt something stir inside him. The woman now standing in front of him no longer looked like the frail old lady who had lost her wallet. Her confident movements, her stylish outfit, and the luxury car parked next to her. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. "It's her." The thought flashed in his mind. The woman standing before him was none other than the editor-in-chief of the very fashion magazine Harry had dreamed of being published in for years. It was none other than Sophia Langevin, whose opinion could make or break any designer's career. Harry couldn't believe his eyes. He had just spoken so rudely to her at the checkout. "Why do you dislike attention so much, madam?" the man asked, expertly folding the cardigan over his arm. What stops you from going to a store without the disguise? Sophia smirked, rolling her eyes slightly, as if she had heard this question 1,000 times before. You know, I used to enjoy the attention of passers-by, she answered with a slight smile. But after so many years in the modeling business and dealing with obsessed fans, you want to disappear from the spotlight every once in a while. Today, I was just an old lady, forgotten by everyone, and you know what? It was wonderful. Harry felt the ground shift beneath him. Sophia had started her career as a successful model and then, step by step, built her empire in the world of fashion magazines. Now, her name was known worldwide. The whole world knows my face, but I don't want them constantly hovering around me, she continued, as if explaining her thoughts not just to her assistant, but to everyone around. I prefer to stay behind the scenes, managing everything from the shadows. For instance, I knew for sure that no one would think about snacks for the guests. I hope there's someone on site to prepare the fruit platter. I've already taken care of everything, madam. Harry abruptly stopped and leaned against the nearest tree, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to calm the wave of panic that had overtaken him. It's her. Repeated in his mind over and over again. All the chaos around him, calls from colleagues, his father's scolding, anger at the traffic jam, now seemed insignificant compared to what he had done. He could have met Sophia at the private viewing, introduced his collection, finally made an impression on this influential woman, but instead, he had harshly reprimanded her for a lost wallet. I've been waiting for this meeting for so long, and I messed it up completely, he thought, feeling an icy wave wash over his entire body. The memory of his sharp words, spoken in a moment of anger, now seemed unbearably foolish. If only he had known who she really was. But that was the thing, Sophia hated attention. She deliberately stayed hidden from the world, keeping to the shadows even when she had to do something as simple as buying fruit. Gathering the last of his strength, he walked back to his car, feeling utterly defeated. His hands trembled as he pulled the keys from his pocket. Inside the car, his father and Marina continued to sit in silence, and for a moment, Harry thought it was the quietest place in the world compared to the noise in his head. I bought myself a Coke, he casually muttered as he sat down in the driver's seat. He sat behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to process everything that had happened. Ben and Marina sat in silence, carefully avoiding his gaze. Marina looked out the window, her face tense, but she said nothing. His father, who usually never missed an opportunity to speak up, also remained silent. Harry knew the silence in the car wasn't out of respect, they just didn't know how to react to his outburst and what happened afterward. The phone, which had been ringing nonstop just a minute ago, was now silent too, as if everyone had realized that disturbing Harry wasn't a good idea. The traffic jam magically started to clear, but the feeling of relief didn't come. Harry stared at the road but drove in a trance, fully absorbed in his thoughts. He felt as if he were driving to his own execution. What have I done? He kept thinking over and over again. The meeting he had waited for all these years was now ruined. He couldn't get the image of the editor, Sophia Langevin, out of his head. When they arrived at the event, the tension between him and Sophia was unbearable. Harry felt his heart clench every time their eyes met. She said nothing, but her smug smile said everything. There was something in her gaze that shook him to his core. It was a mixture of mockery and superiority, as if she were silently telling him, "Yes, I remember you. And I know you remember me." Harry didn't need any further explanation. He already understood everything he needed to. The woman was clearly enjoying the situation, and he was crushed. Harry stood off to the side, watching the fashion show, and couldn't help but admire how flawlessly Marina performed her role. She had always been a true professional. Perfect movements, a bright smile, confident steps. Marina looked like the argument at lunch hadn't even happened. The spat at the table, his father's snide remarks, her husband's sullen silence, and his emotional outburst afterward, all of it seemed to have no effect on her. She was above it all. Your wife truly deserves to be the face of the brand, Harry, one of the guests said enthusiastically. She's your best model. There's no denying it, she's the best among all who performed today. Harry's vision was still blurred. He lifted his head to look at the runway. Yes, she was simply stunning. Thank you, sir. He paused for a moment and then added, I'm very proud to be the husband of such a remarkable woman. Harry fell into thought. Maybe that spat at the store had been a blessing in disguise. He had been so desperate to earn Sophia Langevin's approval that he had completely lost sight of what mattered most, his family. He had thrown himself into his career, leaving the children in Marina's care while he lived in a world of work, fashion shows, and projects. It was as if he were in a dream, surrounded only by models, fabrics, and critics' reviews, while his real life was crumbling. A widow with a living husband, a phrase flashed through his mind. Marina had not only been supporting him in his professional sphere, but also dealing with family problems. The teenagers, wild and hyperactive, spent more time with her than they did with him. It was as if he had dumped all the responsibilities on her, forgetting that she, too, needed support. Now, more than ever, she was going through a tough time, but Harry had been too preoccupied with his ambitions to notice. Oh, my girl, how hard it must be for you, the man whispered to himself, watching the runway. He glanced at Marina, who was now stepping onto the stage to take a bow with the other models. Her smile was flawless, but Harry knew it masked exhaustion. She had always been his rock, his muse, and he had left her to fight the battle alone. This realization pierced him like a cold spear. Maybe it's time to slow down? Harry thought. The sales from his collections in the country more than covered all their expenses. He had achieved a lot, but in his chase for greater success, he had lost sight of the most important thing, his family. He already had everything he needed to live comfortably, to improve their home life, to rebuild relationships with his children and wife. Harry stood there watching Marina, feeling a growing sense of humility and resolve within him. Maybe it was time to reevaluate his priorities. As they neared home, Harry felt a surge of energy. The idea that had come to him seemed more and more right. He suddenly realized that all this time he had been chasing after someone else's standards, forgetting that the most important thing had always been right beside him. Now he knew he was ready to start a new chapter. When the car stopped in front of the house, Marina carefully closed the door and walked toward the porch, as always, maintaining her dignity and calm. But Harry, feeling a rush of childlike excitement, suddenly sped up, scooped her up in his arms, and carried her toward the door. She was clearly stunned, looking at him in confusion, trying to figure out what was happening. But seeing the joyful, sincere smile on his face, she relaxed and laughed. "Harry, what are you doing?" she asked, laughing, but her eyes were glowing with happiness. "Coming home," he answered softly, still smiling. Marina froze for a second, not believing her ears. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time, when he would once again become her husband and a father to their children. At that moment, she realized that her patience and love had not been in vain. When they entered the house, the children greeted them. Amber, as usual, stood by the stairs with her familiar disgruntled expression. Her teenage rebellion was in full swing, and she didn't particularly try to hide her irritation. But Hugo seemed to be in a better mood, approaching his parents with a slight smile. Their mother often jokingly called him Labrador for his optimism and love for people. Harry called both of them closer. After putting Marina back on her feet, he grabbed the kids with both arms and pulled them into a tight hug. These were warm, strong, and genuine embraces, something that had been missing in their family for a long time. At first, the children didn't know how to react, but then they relaxed and hugged their father back. "What's gotten into you today, Dad?" his son asked with a smirk, looking at him curiously. Harry smiled, glanced at Marina, and then back at the children. "I just wanted to remind you how much I love all of you," he said, slightly embarrassed but firm. They stood in the hallway, and the atmosphere in the house suddenly felt light and joyful, as if the clouds had finally cleared. Harry no longer felt the weight on his shoulders. He wasn't thinking about international fashion shows, recognition, or magazine articles anymore. That evening, Harry suggested they go out to dinner for the first time in years. The family was surprised, but happily agreed. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a night when they were reunited, free from old grudges. They laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed the moment. Harry looked at his wife and children, realizing that they were his true wealth, his purpose. "Harry, I love you," Marina said softly, looking into her husband's eyes. "And I love you, Mari." A month had passed since Harry made the decision to prioritize his family and peace. Evenings with his wife and children, long walks, and dinners with his loved ones became his new normal. He had finally found his balance. But one morning, Harry received a phone call. The voice on the other end was polite but insistent. He was invited to an important meeting that, according to the caller, couldn't be postponed. Despite the harmony in his new life, curiosity got the better of him, and Harry agreed. He wanted to know what it was about and who was calling him so urgently. A few hours later, he found himself at a cozy cafe, feeling a bit nervous but more so excited. He walked in and scanned the room until he spotted a figure sitting by the window. It was her, Sophia Langevin, the editor of that very magazine. The woman who had turned his life upside down a month ago. She sat in her signature pose, slightly furrowing her brow and smirking, just like she had at their first meeting during the fashion show. Harry felt his heart race, but this time he decided not to let panic take over. He approached her table, feeling the tension rise between them again, but this time it was different. There was something new in her eyes, something he couldn't immediately understand. "Good afternoon," he said, trying to appear calm. "Good afternoon, Harry," she replied, smiling her trademark smirk. "Sit down, we have something to talk about." He sat down, and Sophia got straight to the point, without any small talk or formalities. "I've been thinking about that show for a while," she began, looking directly at him. "And I've come to the conclusion that you deserve a chance. That's why I want to offer you a feature in my magazine." Harry was stunned. He hadn't expected this turn of events. He thought this chapter of his life was long closed, but now it was all resurfacing. "But why?" he breathed, trying to hide his surprise. "I thought that, after that incident." Sophia raised an eyebrow and interrupted him. "You thought I'd ruin your life after you yelled at a helpless old lady, right?" Her voice was full of irony, but there was no malice. "Trust me, Harry, I figured it out immediately. When you acted so sharply in that store, I already knew it was you, the designer I had been following. And at the show, you looked as pale as a ghost, as if you had already sentenced yourself to the worst punishment." Harry lowered his eyes, remembering that day. She was right, he had been his own judge. But her next words surprised him even more. "You already did all the work for me by voluntarily disappearing off the radar," she continued. "Besides, your new collection really impressed me. I liked it." He slowly lifted his eyes, not believing what he was hearing. "You mean to say that, despite everything that happened, you are willing to give me a chance? This isn't a joke?" Sophia leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening, though still sharp. "Exactly. I see potential in you, and that incident showed me that you know what it means to be human. Everyone makes mistakes, Harry," she paused, gauging his reaction. "Your new collection deserves attention, and I'm ready to write an article about you. The offered sum is significant but not critical, you'll be able to handle it easily. All you need to do is agree." Harry sat across from Sophia, and her offer seemed to hang in the air. A feature in a prestigious magazine, this was what he had dreamed of for years, what he had worked day and night for. But now, looking into her sharp eyes, he realized it wasn't so simple. He hesitated. "Do I really need this?" flashed through his mind. A month ago, he would have accepted this offer without hesitation, thrown himself into work, and once again drowned in the hectic pace, forgetting everything. But now everything was different. His life, which he had so carefully rebuilt, was finally finding harmony. His family, which had been on the brink of falling apart, had become his source of happiness again. They dined together, laughed, spent time with the kids, and the warmth in the house was something he hadn't felt in a long time. And now this offer could change everything. It was like a tempting chance to return to his old life, but with the risk of distancing himself from his loved ones again. He couldn't make the same mistake. Harry began but stopped, choosing his words carefully. I need time. This offer. Sophia seemed to expect this reaction, and her gaze remained calm, even with a slight hint of understanding. I understand, Harry, she replied, raising an eyebrow slightly. This is a serious step. Take a few days, think it over. But I hope you'll make the right decision. Opportunities like this don't come around every day. Harry nodded, stood up, and they exchanged brief farewells. Outside, his thoughts immediately returned to Marina and the children. He needed to talk to her, discuss everything openly before making a decision. In the evening at home, sitting at the kitchen table, he talked with his wife for a long time. Marina listened attentively, but he could see that her anxiety was growing with every word he spoke. Marina, I don't know if I should go back to that world, he finally admitted. Everything has just settled down. We've become truly close again. I feel that our home is the place where I'm happy. And this offer, it could ruin everything again. She sat across from him, her eyes filled with concern. She was scared too. Who would want to lose what they had just recently regained? But despite all this, Marina loved him. She knew his soul had always yearned for design, for creating something new, for being recognized. Harry, she said softly, taking his hand, I'm scared too. I don't want to lose you again. All this time, while you were buried in your work, I felt like a widow with a living husband. But I understand how important this opportunity is for you. And I don't want you to give up on your dream. We can manage if we stick together. She trusted him, believing that he could find the balance. And that was the most important thing. Are you sure? He asked, still uncertain. Marina smiled, her eyes glowing with love. Yes, Harry. I'm sure. We'll do this together. After the article was published in the magazine, it was as if the gates of opportunity had opened. Offers began pouring in from all sides, collaborations with famous brands, participation in international shows, and even requests from celebrities. It was the breakthrough Harry and his brand had long needed. The article by Sophia Langevin, a former model and now a renowned editor of global stature, had elevated his name to a new level. His brand was being discussed not only among the small circles of fashion critics, but also by those who had never even considered it before. But what surprised everyone, including Harry himself, was that he didn't get swept up in the whirlwind of offers and fame. He hired a couple of new assistants to help with organization and streamline sales, but he didn't throw himself into work as he had before. Harry limited the number of shows, making them rare and sophisticated events for the public. Instead of exhausting himself in the constant race for success, he chose a slower, more reliable path. The paradox was that the prestige of his brand only grew. Rare shows, limited releases, and minimal media coverage all created an air of mystery around his clothing. People loved stories like this, where success wasn't flaunted but remained in the shadows, shrouded in intrigue. One evening, sitting with his wife on the porch of their house, Harry smiled as he watched her flipping through catalogs of new shows. She liked seeing her photos in foreign magazine articles. They exuded freshness and pride. No longer a young model, a mother of two, yet still a beauty, the face of the brand, and still in demand. You know, Marina said, not looking up from the pages, I never thought I'd enjoy the idea of international shows. When you first started that thing with Sophia, I was afraid everything would collapse again, that we would drift apart once more. Harry put his cup down on the table and looked at her with a gentle smile. I thought the same, he admitted. I was afraid everything would go down the same path as before. Marina lifted her eyes and met his gaze. Her face lit up with a soft smile. We've learned how to find balance, haven't we? She said quietly. I'm not afraid that we'll lose each other again. Things are different now. At least, that's how I feel. To be honest, even Ben has calmed down. I overheard him once bragging to his friend that you make more money with clothes than someone's son. How did he put it? A paper soldier from headquarters? Harry nodded, chuckling. Yes, his father had indeed changed a lot after that argument in the car. Because of that, the designer had become more relaxed about his work. His wife had helped him with that. Now, every show was an event they planned together. They traveled to shows in other countries as a couple, as spouses and partners, not as two strangers doing different things. Fashion had taken on new colors for them. And you know what? Marina smirked. I like that you've become a bit of a mystery to all these fashion critics. Rare collections, few interviews, everyone thinks you've got some kind of secret. Harry laughed, realizing she was right. He had not only preserved his family, but also turned his brand into something unique. There were rumors about him, his collections were eagerly awaited, his name was on everyone's lips, but now it wasn't a race for him, it was an opportunity to live in pleasure. He scooted closer to his wife and wrapped her in a soft, warm embrace. Burying his nose in her delicate neck, he whispered, "The secret is that I love my family very much.